Welcome to Mooney Reads, and welcome to a weekend reading update. This week has been mostly manga. I think I mentioned I Hear the Sunspot last week, and I've been continuing on with this series. So I Hear the Sunspot, Theory of Happiness, and then the Limit arc, which I've read the first 2 volumes of. So we've got one more and I'm waiting for it to come in. I kind of feel like I need to finish at least this arc before saying too much about the series, because I feel like depending on how this arc ends, I feel like will influence how I feel about it as a whole, if that makes sense. I will say that a big thing that this series has going for it is character. We get information about secondary characters that makes the story feel more rounded, which is really good, because if it were only the romance, there's something to be desired. But the majority of the reason for that is because a lot of this hinges on miscommunication and people just literally not talking. And that's very obnoxious to me personally to read. However, I think that getting into the middle art of the arc of Limit, it gives me some hope, because with the way that some characters are developing and some characters are maybe not, or holding themselves back, it makes sense. So I see dynamic characters and not lazy writing, which is kind of how miscommunication feels to me sometimes. So Yuki Fumino, I think, is good at developing a lot of the things necessary for a good story. Even if I'm not in love with all of the mechanics necessarily that she chooses to use. Another thing that I like about this series is the conversation about accessibility is very nuanced in a way that you don't see a whole lot. I'm not sure if the author is deaf or hard of hearing. I've tried to look into it a little bit, but I'm also a little bit scared to look too close, just because I don't want spoilers for the series. But I hate how hard it is to find information about manga writers. So I have some reservations about some of it, but overall I am having a good time, and the characters are interesting enough that I'm going on through despite not maybe liking some aspects of it. So that was the only thing that I finished this week. But I did start Ugliness by Moshtari Hilal. This is by someone who was born in Afghanistan and lives in Germany and is translated from the German. And like the title says, this is exploring kind of the societal idea of ugliness. It does that through a mix of essay, poetry, and photography and other modes of art. She talks about her experience being seen as and kind of internalizing the idea that she is ugly, while also talking about the history of some of these ideas. So there's one piece in here that pulls specifically from Black Skin, White Masks. So it begins kind of talking about the experience of feeling ugly, being told you're ugly, the feeling of alienation that comes from that. And then this first section is specifically diving into the idea of the socially acceptable nose. So it's looking at the history of the rhinoplasty, looking at the anti-Semitism, among other things that are kind of at the root of that. It also talks at length about eugenics, since that is where a lot of our culturally constructed ideas of what ugliness is kind of comes from. So far I'm really enjoying this. I love the multimedia of it all. The references that she's pulling from are really interesting, both in terms of pulling from people who have talked on these topics and looking to the original sources of some of these ideas. And I have a feeling I'm going to get through this one pretty fast. I'm on page 64, and I started it today, and I just worked 8 hours too, so I haven't exactly had a lot of time to read, but I've been reading it basically every chance I can get. So that's all that I have as far as reading goes. So far as other things that I've been doing, I've been rewatching RuPaul's Drag Race All Stars Season 2, which is a pretty iconic season. Having a good time with that. And then the majority of my time I feel like I've spent kind of reorganizing some stuff. And going through pictures, getting a lot of pictures. I've been putting stuff in frames, and I'm going to be making some picture books. So that's kind of, I think, the main activity that I've had going on. And then finally I have this week's haul. Well, I already owned the first 3 volumes of I Hear the Sunspot. I did have to buy volume 4. And when I bought that, I also bought the Build a Boyfriend Project, which is Mason Deaver's debut romance novel, and it sounds really cute. It's got like fake dating, and also talks a lot about queer identity, and also one of the characters on this cover, I want to steal their sweater and their gender, so that just makes it all better. Another thing that I got this week is a whole lot of zines. First, I'll be talking about what I got from Last Word Press, which publishes a lot of things on politics, particularly anarchism, although their library is huge, so you get kind of a bit of variety, it seems. The first one I'm going to talk about is the one I am most excited about, which is about STAR, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, which was later changed to Street Transgender Action Revolutionaries. It was the group that Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson took a part in founding, so it's fairly well known for that. But this has a lot of stuff actually by Sylvia Rivera or interviews with Sylvia Rivera. Also one with Marsha P. Johnson, as well as a couple of other things. So I'm super stoked about that. Really, this Star Zine is the whole reason I found the account, and then looked into more of their stuff, and grabbed a handful of other things, a lot of which I don't really know too much about. So we have Research for Radicals, How-To Manual for Activists of All Kinds, Colonization and Decolonization, a Manual for Indigenous Liberation in the 21st Century, Palestine Mon Amour, and COINTELPRO, The Dangers We Face. Strictly speaking, I got this one for my partner, but I'll be reading it at some point too. And then the other place that I got some zines from was Crafter DIY, which have a lot of things about queerness and nature and lots of other things, also cool stickers. But the 2 zines that I got were Small Affirmations, which includes some nice art with affirmations, and then What's in a Name, a zine about choosing a name. Other than that, I've also been working on other videos. I have a couple of wrap-ups that I have filmed and in the early stages of putting together and so forth. So, those will come out hopefully very soon. So that is just about all I have for this week. In the comments, let me know what you've been reading or enjoying this week. And thank you all so much for watching. Bye.